The Mafia'S Good Girl, Chapter 1. Good morning, beautiful girl. Violet Carvey heard her mom's chirpy voice as soon as she entered the kitchen. Her mom, Barbara, was standing over the cramped kitchen counter in their small apartment, fixing a nice tuna sandwich and putting it inside a brown bag. "Good morning, Mom. What are you doing?" Violet replied. "I'm packing you lunch for school." "Mom, I'm not in school anymore. I've graduated last month." Oh, Barbara stopped whatever she was doing immediately. She didn't remember that her beautiful daughter was already 18 and a high school graduate. "It's fine. I'll take it anyway," Violet said sweetly. She felt bad about it and grabbed the brown paper bag, stuffing it inside her backpack. "Thanks, Mom, you're welcome," Barbara smiled. "By the way, what is Dylan doing in the house? Shouldn't he be in New York right now?" "Mom, Dylan's dropped out from college," Violet explained patiently. "He did?" Barbara gasped in shock like this was the first time she heard it. "Why?" Violet let out a sigh. This was not the first time she had to explain to her mom about the things going on around the house. Ever since Barbara got diagnosed with Alzheimer's last year, her memory and health had been deteriorating. Barbara stopped working entirely, and Violet's older brother, Dylan, even dropped out of college and moved back home so he could help them out. "No reason, he just doesn't think school's for him," Violet lied. She knew her mom would feel bad if she told her the real reason. The Carvey family had been struggling financially for the past several years, especially since Violet's father died. Life hadn't always been this difficult for them, especially when Violet was young. She was actually born into a middle-upper-class family. James Carvey was a successful businessman in a small town in New Jersey. Violet and Dylan enjoyed a wonderful lifestyle growing up, but everything changed when Violet was 13 years old. Her father wanted to expand his business, and he made a bad business deal with some powerful people in Italy. These people ended up bankrupting her father's business. It got so bad that her father had to borrow money from so many people just so the family could stay afloat. In the end, Violet's father had to sell their 3-story home, all their cars and assets, and they moved into a small rental apartment in Newark. It didn't help that James fell ill, and he couldn't work to support his family. Barbara had to step up and work at the factories. And finally, James Carvey couldn't take it anymore. One day, he said he was going to the store, but he ended up crashing the car down the cliff on the highway. He died, leaving his family with a mountain of debt and some insurance money. As soon as Violet turned 14, she started working at ice cream stores or coffee shops to help out the family. Dylan, who was 2 years older, started working at a local bar owned by their father's old friend, the Union. Once Dylan turned 18, he got a scholarship to study at Fordham. Barbara was so happy for him, and he promised that he'd get a good education so their family could go back to the way it was. Unfortunately, only 2 years later, Barbara's health began to decline with Alzheimer's. Violet was still a senior in high school. Dylan knew it was his responsibility as the oldest son to go back and help his family, so he dropped out of Fordham and returned to Newark. He got his old job back at the Union, except he also did many other side hustles, the kind of work that Violet would never mention to her mom. "Oh, so that's why Dylan's been around the house lately." Barbara nodded her head. "Yeah, he's dropped out since last year, Mom. He's been around ever since." "Oh, I see," Barbara said. Violet smiled sweetly, but she knew she would have to explain this again tomorrow morning. "Anyway, I gotta go to work. Call me if you need anything, or check the post-its if you forget something," Violet said as she grabbed her things from the kitchen counter. "Okay, dear. Have fun at work. I love you, Mom." "Love you too, sweet girl." Barbara kissed her daughter's cheek, and Violet made her way to the door. She checked her reflection in the mirror for 2 seconds before she headed out. Her dark brown hair was long, her face was pale, but her purple-blue eyes were shining bright. If she had more time in the morning, she would have put on some makeup, but there was no time for pleasantries. Her shift at the local coffee shop starts in 15 minutes, and she should be out the door by now. So without a second thought, Violet shrugged and left the house. Walking out of the house, Violet quickly raced to the bus stop, and she managed to catch the incoming bus going downtown. After a 10-minute ride later, she arrived at her stop and made her way to the coffee shop. Within minutes, Violet already got her apron on, and she was manning the register at the coffee shop. "Welcome to City Coffee. What can I get you today?" Violet greeted her first customer of the day. This was a line she had spoken so many times in her life, it came out like a reflex. She didn't even have to look up from the register. She'd just hear their order, punch it in, and quickly make the drink. "Violet? Violetcarvey?" The register at the coffee shop. Girl standing in front of her said. Violet looked up from the register and saw a familiar face. It was a girl about her age, and she might be seen this girl around school before. "Oh, hey. You're Nicole, right?" "Yeah, we took a peek out together." "That's right. How are you?" Violet smiled. "I'm good. I'm with Hanson and Ashley. You remember them?" Nicole turned to the glass windows and waved at her friends standing outside. "Guys, look, it's Violet. Our valedictorian." "Oh yeah." Violet laughed nervously and waved at the people outside. They were waving at her and mouthing his. "I go here all the time. I didn't know you work here," Nicole said. "Only almost every day." Violet turned her eyes back to the register. "So what can I get you?" "An iced latte, please." Coming right up, Violet punched the order and turned to the coffee station. Her hands were skillfully working the coffee machine. She loved the smell of freshly ground coffee, and she found making coffees to be a therapeutic act. She'd prefer if people didn't talk to her when she was making them, but Nicole didn't know that. She was too excited to run into a high school friend, so she kept chatting. "I can't believe that high school's already over." "Can you?" she said. "Time sure flies," Violet replied shortly. "I know. I'm excited about college, though." "I'm going to Georgetown." "Georgetown's a great school. Congratulations." "Thanks. And I heard you got a full-ride scholarship to Harvard." "Is that true?" "Yeah." "That's so cool. When are you leaving?" "I'm not going to Harvard." "What?" Nicole squeaked so loud, people nearby turned their heads to her. "I had to turn it down." Violet shrugged simply. "You turned down a full-ride scholarship to Harvard?" "Yeah. I wish I could go, but I can't be too far away from New Jersey right now. My mom needs me." She gave Nicole a weak smile and turned back to the coffee she was making. "Oh, you're such a good person, V." Nicole pouted and sighed. "I don't know if I could do that if I were you. Here's your iced latte." "That'll be $3.75. Violet put the drink on the counter. "Here you go. Keep the change." Nicole handed her a $5 bill. "Thank you." Nicole took the drink and smiled. Violet smiled politely back and turned her attention to the next customer. Nicole took the hint, and she headed outside. "Hi, welcome to City Coffee. What can I get you?" Violet's shift at the coffee shop ended at around 5 p.m. She was tired from standing around all day, but the day wasn't over yet. She took a quick dinner break before jumping into another bus. This time, it was heading to the Union in Jersey City. Ever since she graduated high school and she wasn't going to college, Violet thought about filling her time with as much work as she could. Not only that, her mother needed money for treatment, but the Carvey family still owed a lot of money to a lot of people. She had to do her part to help chip in any way she could. Violet arrived at the Union just before 7 o'clock. The Union was a fancy Western saloon-style bar that had been around in the neighborhood since the 1980s ES. The owner, Danny, was a good friend of Violet's dad because they grew up together in high school. Danny felt bad about what happened to James, so when James's son and daughter asked for a job at his bar, he allowed them to work and paid them a little extra sometimes. Violet started working as a waitress there a few months ago. Danny noticed right away that she was a smart girl. She was also a skilled barista, and once she started watching the bartenders mixing drinks, it didn't take long before she ended up picking up that skill as well. Violet preferred working as a bartender than as a waitress. Sometimes the guys in the bar would get drunk and handsy, and they'd put their hands on her miniskirt. That never sat well with her, especially when Dylan was around. He would start a fight over it. But being the bartender, Violet felt a lot safer because she was always behind the bar. No one could touch her there. She'd make less money in tips, but the peace of mind was priceless. Dylan was always around the bar a lot, as he was now promoted as the bar manager by Danny. Working under Danny was great, but Dylan was always looking for ways to make more money. Violet noticed that Dylan would sometimes do shady deals in the VIP section. He'd find girls or drugs for the VIP customers. One time, he even got a guy a gun. Dylan never wanted to talk about his backdoor activities with Violet, so whenever she asked about it, he always shrugged it off and told her it's better if she doesn't know. "Why are you dressed so extra today?" "It's like you're applying for a job at a bank," Violet commented, as she saw Dylan walking out of the manager's office in a suit and tie. Normally, her brother would only wear jeans and a black t-shirt. His long dark hair was always messy and unkempt, but he made an effort to comb them today. "Didn't you hear? We got special guests coming tonight." Dylan played with his eyebrows and leaned against the bar counter. "Watch it, I just cleaned the bar." Violet shoved him away. "Sorry," he muttered, and took out a cigarette from his pocket. "And what special guests?" "Those basketball guys. Or that rapper Ice-T," Violet said as she wiped the bar again. "Nope, not athletes and rappers." "Then what?" "The Mafia." Violet's eyes shot up instinctively. She thought Dylan must be joking, but his expression was dead serious. He took a long drag of his cigarette before blowing the smoke away, in the direction opposite of Violet. "What Mafia?" she asked. "The Van Zandt family," Dylan whispered lowly, so that only she could hear him. "They're coming tonight, and they've got the whole VIP section booked." Much like everyone who had grown up in New Jersey, Violet had heard about the Van Zandt clan, like it was a folklore story. They were the biggest mobster group in New Jersey since the Luciano family. The leader, Damon Van Zandt, took over the leadership after Joe Luciano died 5 years ago. Violet had heard many stories. Most of them weren't great, but she never saw these people in real life. She never had a reason to. Her life was mostly peaceful and idyllic. She spent all her days at school, working at the coffee shop, and she'd go to church on Sundays. It was only recently that she started working at the union, and so far, the only famous people that came here were rap stars or athletes. Suddenly, as if on cue, the front door flew open and a group of men in black suits appeared. Violet turned her head instantly. She noticed the atmosphere in the air shifted as this group of guys entered the room. Dylan quickly put out his cigarette and started walking to the door to greet the men. One of the men stood out from the rest. He was standing in the very middle. He was tall, tan-skinned, dark-haired, and tattoos were peeking out of his expensive three-piece suit. Violet found herself gazing at this mysterious figure. His eyes were dark and unreadable, but his gaze was sharp, sharper than that killer jawline. And that was the first time Violet saw him in person, the devil in the flesh, Damon Van Zandt. The Mafia'S Good Girl, Chapter 2. Damon's point of view. "Good morning, Mr. Van Zandt." Damon looked up to see his consigliere greeting him at the door to his study. Consigliere is another word for advisor, most notably to a crime boss, such as Damon himself. His consigliere's name is Adrian Luciano. He was the nephew to the famed mob king Joe Joseph Luciano, who was the head of the New Jersey underworld from the 1980s up to now, when Damon took over. Adrian, being a Luciano himself, had more claim to the throne over Damon, who was only an orphan when Joe Luciano took him in. But Adrian never wanted the throne. Adrian preferred a more peaceful lifestyle with his wife Talia. So when Damon was willing to take over the throne, Adrian was more than happy to help him. They grew up together, and Adrian knew there was no one more fitting to be king than Damon Van Zandt. Damon was not born into the Luciano family. In fact, he never even met his real family. When he was only a baby, his mother left him on the footsteps of a Catholic church with only a blanket and his name. He was raised as an orphan at the church before he was put in foster care as a young kid. He moved from home to home before finally, at the age of 14, Damon met Joseph Luciano, who soon became a father figure to him. Damon was first raised to be a trained assassin. He was agile, quick, and cunning. He killed his first man at the age of 15, and the man was twice his age and size. Damon soon became Joseph's favorite killing machine. He would do everything Joseph told him to, no questions asked. But after some time had passed, killing became a boring chore for the quick-witted Damon. Joseph saw this too. Damon had the potential for leadership and politics, so Joseph started grooming him to become his successor. It worked out pretty well, as Joseph never had a son of his own. He had one daughter though, a beautiful girl named Isabella. Isabella was the first girl Damon ever really loved. She had long dark hair and purple-blue eyes. Damon loved everything about her, the way she speaks, the way she dances, and most of all, he loved her heart. In a world as cruel and dark as the Mafia underground, Isabella was a ray of light and hope for him. After pursuing Isabella for years, at the age of 19, Isabella finally said yes to marrying Damon. His wedding day was the happiest day of his life. Joseph even arranged the biggest wedding party New Jersey had ever known. But on the day of the wedding, when everyone was drunk and high on love, a rival gang, the Maranzano family, appeared out of nowhere and started opening fire. Joseph was killed on the spot, and so was Damon's beautiful bride. It was the most gruesome sight Damon had ever seen. The happiest day of his life had turned into the worst. They managed to kill almost all of the Maranzano guys that crashed the wedding, but that was nothing compared to their losses. They lost their king, Joseph, and the princess, Isabella. And as for Damon, he lost every nothing he ever held dear. Ever since that day, Damon took over the post as the king, and he vowed to avenge Joseph and Isabella's death. He also made another vow. He would never fall in love again. Love was a weakness, and there was no room for weakness when you live in a world like his. If you're finished with that paperwork, your presence is required downstairs, Your Grace, Adrian said again. You're trying to be funny, aren't you? Damon scoffed and closed the stack of files on his desk. Calling you boss is a cliché, don't you think? I'm trying to be more creative here, Adrian replied. Fuck off, Adrian. I will. I'm just supposed to let you know that everything's ready. They're waiting for you. Damon knew exactly what that meant. He buttoned his suit and stood up from his chair. With a menacing grin playing on his face, Damon strode out of the study and headed to the basement. Adrian was following close behind him, but he didn't go into the basement. Damon was going into battle, and the advisor wasn't needed on the battlefield. Adrian stayed outside, and he was pacing nervously. Damon pushed the metal doors behind the wooden door to the room in the basement. This was a special room built under the estate that resembled a war bunker. It was a room meant for protection, but ever since he took over, Damon turned the room into a torture chamber for his enemies. And today, the room was housing two Maranzano boys that Damon's S guys picked up last night. Boss, Liam, Damon's #1 right-hand man, greeted him. Damon nodded at Liam, and Liam pulled the black fabric covering the two Maranzano guys' heads. They were both tied to a chair, their faces bruised and swollen, and so were their kneecaps. Please, Damon, please. The guy on the left said, It was my cousin's idea. We had nothing to do with it. Damon, it was 5 years ago. A lot of things had changed since then. "We even gave up a lot of our New York territories to you," the guy on the right said. "No, you didn't give it up. I took them," Damon said curtly. He started pacing around the two guys, and the one on the left closed his eyes in fear. He even smelled like pee, as he had probably pissed himself. "Last night. And you're right, 5 years is a long time. I should probably let it go," Damon said to the guy on the right. He swallowed hard and waited for Damon to continue. "Unfortunately, 5 years is not a long enough time for a vendetta." The two guys shuddered in fear as Damon took out a gun from his holster. Damon clicked the safety off and pointed the mouth between the two guys. "Damon, please," the one on the left begged. "You're only gonna prolong this war," the one on the right said. "There's already enough innocent blood being shed." Damon ignored their pleas and turned to Liam instead. "How many mouths do I need to send a message?" he asked. "Just one," Liam replied. "That's what I thought." Without wasting another second, Damon had pulled the trigger. He didn't even need to look, and he shot his target straight in the head. The guy on the right went limp as there was a clear bullet hole on his forehead. "You can send the message," Damon said to the guy on the left, who was shaking through and through. "Damon Van Zandt does not forget." Damon tried wiping the blood on his cuffs, but it was no use. There was too much splatter, and now his suit was ruined. He climbed up the stairs in annoyance and found Adrian waiting for him at the door. "It's done," Damon announced. That was fast. Adrian followed as Damon kept walking. "It's not even afternoon yet, and I've already ruined my suit," Damon sighed. "For someone who's not Italian, you speak like a true Italian," Adrian chuckled. "He just killed a man, but he's worried about his suit. What can I say? Death is just a natural human process." "Right, Adrian?" Damon shot Adrian a knowing look. "Right." Adrian's smile turned flat. Damon stopped at the door to his study, and Adrian stopped as well. Adrian opened his mouth, and it looked like he was going to say something, but he wasn't fast enough. "I'm taking a quick break." "Send my number one in," Damon said quickly. He didn't wait for Adrian to answer, and he just left, disappearing back into his study. As soon as he was inside, Damon let out a long sigh and took off his bloody suit and shirt. His toned body was all muscles, and there were marks and cuts all over. These were battle scars that he'd accumulated all these years. Damon made his way to the desk and stared at the stack of files before him. He was obsessed with eliminating the Maranzano family, which was the biggest mafia family in New York and a longtime enemy to the Luciano family. The files in front of him contained data of the Maranzano businesses as well as their key players. The two guys downstairs were only pieces of pawns to his chess set. Damon only needed them to send a message to their king, Victor Maranzano, that his family's glory days are coming to an end. The knocking sound pulled Damon from his thoughts, and he looked up at the door. The door creaked open, and a woman walked in. She was Sabrina, Damon's #1 female companion of the week. Ever since Isabella, Damon never gave his heart to anyone else, and girls were only the means to an end. Sabrina was young and eager to please. She was wearing her sexy latex uniform that revealed very little to the imagination. A playful smile stretched on her face as she strode over to Damon's desk. "I've been waiting for your call all day," she whispered seductively. "Got some business to take care of in the morning," Damon said as he got up. "I heard." Sabrina stood right in front of him and put her hands on his broad chest. "You've been working so hard, master. Let me take care of you for a change." Sabrina pushed Damon until he sat back down on the chair. The smile on her face was growing larger as she climbed on top of him. Her lips were aimed for his neck, and Damon's hand slowly reached up to her neck. "You!" Damon hissed as his hand choked the girl's neck. She gasped in shock as she couldn't breathe. "You don't tell me what to do," he ordered, and she nodded her head. Damon released his hand, and Sabrina staggered back. Her hands went to her neck, which was now bruised and blue, Get on your fucking knees." Damon stood up and undid his belt. Swallowing hard, Sabrina quickly obeyed her master. It was her first week being Damon's number one, as he got bored of his previous number one. Damon usually never spent more than a couple of weeks with the same girl. But Sabrina was determined to make a difference. She came from the rougher part of town, and being the Mafia King's number one girl was the best thing she could aspire for. The sound of Damon's leather belt connecting with her skin sent shivers up and down her spine. "Ah!" She screamed in pain, but that only made him rougher, and he struck her harder. When the afternoon was done, and the sun had set over the city, Damon knew it was time for another night of work. Tonight, he and his boys were visiting a local bar in Jersey City called the Union to make deals with other families around the area. Damon had to make sure he was able to keep the peace inside his own territory if he were to make war with the nearby Maranzano family. The night started out like any other night. After leaving a torn-up Sabrina on the floor of his study, Damon put on a fresh new suit and headed out the door. Outside the estate, 3 black SUVs were already parked and waiting for him. Liam and his boys were in the first car. The last car was filled with bodyguards, and the second one was for him and Adrian. Adrian kissed his wife, Talia, goodbye before following Damon into the car. Talia waved her hand and smiled, both at Damon and at her husband. Damon replied with a curt wave as the cars drove out of the gates. After about 20 minutes of driving, the cars pulled up in front of the Union. After making sure that the place was good, Damon got out of the car and walked into the building. Liam and his other bodyguards were already ahead of him. Liam whispered something in the bar manager's ear, and within the next 5 minutes, everyone who wasn't necessary was leaving the premises, including the waitresses and bartenders. Damon sat in the VIP section with his boys as they waited for the arrival of the other families. The bar was now almost empty except for the manager, and there was one female bartender still at the bar. "What happened? Where's everyone going?" the girl asked. "We need everybody out. This is an official Van Zandt business." "You two, V, you gotta go," the manager said. "What? I thought I was gonna ride home with you." "Not tonight. Here, you can take my car. I'll find a way home." The manager gave her his car key, and she took it reluctantly. "Dylan?" she asked. "Don't worry, just go," he ordered. Damon leaned over and whispered something in Liam's ear. Liam then stood up and walked closer to the bar. "Dylan," he yelled. "Yeah?" The manager turned back. "The boss wants your best scotch," Liam said. "All right, I'll go get it." "Nah, we need you in there." "Have the girl bring it." Liam didn't wait for Dylan to respond, and he already turned back to the VIP section. The girl and the manager exchanged a worried look. "Just get the drink, give it to him, and you go straight home." "You understand?" the manager hissed. The girl quickly nodded her head. Dylan was now joining the Van Zandt army at the VIP section. Liam was telling him what to do and what to expect once all the families were gathered. Meanwhile, Damon's eyes traveled back to the bar, and he found himself watching the girl. She was grabbing a bottle of scotch and several glasses before bringing them over to their table. Damon watched as the girl came closer and closer to his view. She had long brown hair and eyes as blue as the ocean with just a hint of purple. Her skin was smooth like porcelain, and her cheeks turned a slight hint of pink as soon as she saw him watching her. And that was the first time Damon saw her in person, the angel in the flesh, Violet Rose Carvey. The Mafia'S Good Girl, Chapter 3. Violet's point of view. Violet grabbed the most expensive bottle of whiskey she could find, the 30-year-old Macallan, and the retail price was about $1,600. She brought the bottle over to their table and put it down right in the middle. She thought they would be impressed once they saw the bottle. That was most people's reaction. But the guys just looked at her with a bored stare. "Yeah, we're gonna need more than one bottle, sweetheart." The guy sitting next to Damon snickered. Coming right up, Violet said and turned to her heels. She didn't know why she was stammering. She had been serving drinks for customers her entire life. She didn't need to stutter like that. Violet thought maybe the nervousness was because a mafia king was staring at her like a hawk. She didn't know what she did wrong, but Damon Van Zandt had been glaring at her ever since he walked in here. Violet was busy pulling out more bottles of the Macallan from the bar when she heard another guy spoke to Dylan. "So, I heard you got some pretty girls around here." "Yeah." "Where are the girls at?" Another guy laughed. "You want them right now?" Dylan asked. "Why not right now?" "Well, all right." Dylan got up to his feet and strode to his office. Violet rolled her eyes to herself because she knew what was coming next. This wasn't the first time Dylan hosted a private party for special guests. Danny, the bar owner, was never fond of these things, so Dylan would have to do it under the table. This was a risky business, but Dylan was always handsomely paid, so the risk was worth it. "Why, hello, boys." A group of female strippers emerged from Dylan's office. They were all dressed in revealing lace clothing. Or actually, let's just call it what it was. They were dressed in their underwear. The guys cheered and smiled as the group of girls joined them. Dylan went all out with this one. He handpicked only the best and prettiest girls for this event. Violet brought 5 more bottles of the Macallan and put them on the table. She had to maneuver through the group of dancing girls to get there, but she made it just fine. Once she put down the drinks, Violet waited for a moment to see if they'd ask her anything else, but the guys were too busy getting lap dances from the girls. Shrugging to herself, Violet went back to the bar to close the register. Every now and then, she'd look up from the register and watch Dylan hand out packets of white powder to the guys. She shook her head to herself and continued counting the register. Then she took a moment to look up again, and this time her eyes met Damon's. Damon's eyes were dark and mysterious. Violet couldn't read what he was thinking. Everyone else seemed to be having a great time, but Damon looked almost bored. "I told you to get out of here, V." Dylan's voice broke through her thoughts. Violet whipped her head around to see Dylan leaning by the bar. "I gotta close the register first, you dummy," she replied. "I can do that," he hissed. "Like you did the last time you had a private party." Every time Dylan hosted a private party, he always ended up blacking out. He'd forget to close down the register, and he'd get in trouble with Danny the next day. Violet was only looking out for him. "Good point." Dylan sighed. "But you get your ass out to here as soon as you're done." He pointed a warning finger at her. Dylan knew how rowdy these parties could get, and they were dealing with the mafia this time. He didn't like his little sister being around these people. "Don't worry, I have no intention of staying a second longer," Violet replied and continued crunching the numbers. "Yo, Dylan." Another one of the guys yelled. "Yes? What can I do for you boys?" Dylan returned to the table with a fake smile on his face. "Our guests are arriving. We'll need more bottles." "All right, man. I got you." Dylan nodded. As if on cue, the front door opened and a group of older-looking guys walked in. They were also dressed sharp. As if on cue, the front door opened and a group of older-looking guys walked in. They were also dressed sharply, in black suits. If she didn't know any better, Violet would think that they'd just walked into a funeral. The group of guys met each other, and Damon got up to shake hands with one of the older guys. Meanwhile, on the other edge of the table, Violet saw one of the stripper girls was giving one of the guys a blowjob. What a sight to see! Violet blushed to herself as she was taken aback. She wasn't even the type that watches porn, and one was happening right before her eyes. She almost lost her count too, but luckily, the calculator showed her the right numbers. After she finished closing down the register, Violet took one last look at Dylan. The guys were sharing their white powders with him, and he was now high out of his mind. Violet let out a sigh and turned away. This was another sight she didn't want to see. In between the rowdy guys and the dancing girls, Violet managed to slip out quietly out of the room. She grabbed her things from the staff room before heading outside to the parking lot. But before she could make it to the back door, she turned a corner and found someone was standing in front of her. The walls were cramped, and the tall man was completely blocking her way. "Excuse me," she said in annoyance. But the man didn't budge. "Leaving so soon?" he said in a low, husky voice. The man lifted his face, and Violet could see who he was. It was Damon. His dark brown eyes pierced into hers, and Violet found herself swallowing hard. "Are we boring you?" he said again. His one hand was holding the wall in front of him while he was leaning back. Violet had no way of escaping. "No. My shift's ended," she stammered. Damon's lips curved up a smile. Then he cocked his head to the side and watched her like she was a sight to marvel at. "What's your name?" he said. "Violet." "Nice to meet you, Violet." Damon stretched out his hand, and Violet took a second to think before she shook it politely. Violet was about to pull her hand away, but Damon held it there a second longer. Violet looked up instinctively, and suddenly, Damon was standing so close in front of her. She almost gasped in shock, but Damon only smirked. And not just that, there was a spark in his eyes. Violet didn't know if she should run or scream, but she quickly pulled her composure and pulled her hand away. With his hand off the wall, Violet saw a space for her to walk away. But just before she was about to slip past him, he said, "So, what's a girl like you doing in a place like this?" Violet turned back around instinctively. "A girl like me?" she asked. "Beautiful, smart, and—" He paused for a beat before adding, "clearly inexperienced." The sentence started out great, but Violet was offended by the end of it. She prided herself in her work. She hated it when people looked down on her just because she was young or she didn't look the part. "For your information, I'm well qualified for this job," Violet stated matter-of-factly. "I've been working here since—" "I wasn't talking about the job," Damon cut her off. Violet fell silent. If he wasn't talking about the job, what was he talking about? Damon let out another one of that devilish smirk and a low chuckle. He motioned a little wave before turning around, muttering, "Have a good night, Violet." 30 minutes later, Violet found herself sitting in Dylan's car in the parking lot, unsure of what to do. If this were just another one of Dylan's stupid private parties, Violet wouldn't think twice before leaving. But this was different. Something didn't sit well with her. Hosting a party for the Mafia could mean trouble. She heard stories and watched a lot of movies about these people. Like, what if they start killing people? Aside from her mom, Dylan was the only family she had left. Violet wouldn't know what to do with herself if something bad happens to him. She glanced at the clock again. It was a little over 1 a.m. This kind of party would probably be over in a few hours. Violet thought maybe she should wait and take Dylan home with her. But suddenly, on the corner of her eye, Violet noticed a black car driving by from the rearview mirror. She had seen the same car driving by for the past 15 minutes. Something was clearly wrong here. The black car stopped in front of the entrance to the bar. Violet could feel the tension in the air rising. She slumped down to her seat and continued watching from the rearview mirror. She noticed 2 guys were in that car. They weren't dressed in black suits. One of them picked up something that looked like a walkie-talkie and started talking. And not long after that, Violet saw another black car pulling up behind it. This time, the car had a police siren on the top. "This is a cop car," she thought. Violet immediately understood what was happening. The cops probably got tipped off about this meeting, and they were about to bust through the doors. This would be really bad, especially for Dylan, who was hosting and facilitating this party. There were girls and drugs involved, and Dylan would go to prison. No, no, no. Without a second thought, Violet stealthily slipped out of the car and made her way back inside. She had to warn Dylan and make sure he got out of here before the cops came in. Dylan. Violet was racing through the back corridor and screaming for Dylan, but when she got to the main room, she saw that it was empty, except for the stripper girls. The girls were shoving wads of money into their underwear, and some were already changing into their normal clothes. "What? Where did everyone go?" Violet demanded. One of the stripper girls pointed to the staff room's door. Violet quickly made her way over. She pushed the door back to find the group of guys, all 20 of them, rummaging and looking for something all around the staff room. "What are you guys doing in here?" she demanded. "It's staff only. The only staff here has passed out." One of the guys pointed to a blacked-out Dylan. He was lying flat on the floor. "Dylan?" Violet quickly bent down for him. He was still breathing. He was just asleep. "They're coming in," one of the guys said as she peered from the window. "We got company." All the other guys suddenly took out their guns and pointed the mouths to the door. Violet's jaw dropped in shock. She had never seen so many guns in one place at a time. "Guys, they're cops," another guy said, trying to defuse the situation. He was one of the young guys that sat next to Damon the entire night. "The consigliere's right. You can't just shoot at cops," an older man said. "So what do you suggest? We just bend over and surrender ourselves?" Another guy said. He was the biggest out of everyone, and he looked the angriest. "Liam, calm down." Violet heard Damon's voice spoke. "He was in here too. There's an exit around here somewhere. We just gotta find it." The guys began looking around the room, moving around furniture and tapping on the walls. "This is fucking stupid. The only dude that knows the exit is out cold." Liam roared again. Violet realized Dylan must have told them about the secret exit from the staff room, but he passed out before he could tell them where. "Hey?" Violet found herself saying, "If you're looking for the exit, you're looking in the wrong place." Everyone stopped moving and turned to Violet. She got up to her feet and walked to the large painting hanging on one side of the wall. She lifted the painting down and revealed a secret door behind it. The door was small, almost like a window, and it would lead them straight to the backside of the parking lot. This was something Danny installed years ago when he was buying into the whole apocalypse bullshit. Not wasting another minute, the guys opened the door, and one by one they slipped right out. Violet stepped aside and watched everyone piling out of the room. Damon was one of the last ones to leave, and he stopped his tracks to talk to her, like he wasn't in a hurry. "I'll be sure to return the favor," he said. "Don't worry about it, just go," she said. "Oh no." Damon Van Zandt never forgets. Damon left her one last smirk and a nod before finally exiting the room. Once the door was closed behind him, Violet hung the painting back, making sure the exit was completely covered. And suddenly, the door to the staff room was busted open. A half-dozen policemen in uniform held their guns up at Violet, and she gasped in terror. "Police, put your hands up,"